Hey Guy, today we'll gently explore a world quiet, steady, and very, very ancient. Not war, not political intrigue, not the romantic tales of royal dynasties, but rather the history of administrative paperwork. A topic no one truly asks for, yet one that has quietly persisted throughout human history. From the first clay tablet, inscribed with cuneiform, to the leave of absence request you submitted just yesterday. Have you ever wondered who was the first person to decide, I need a duplicate of this tax form? Or who was the first to argue with someone else about where to place the red stamp on a sheet of paper? Please listen to the entire story. If you find it good, please like, share, and follow the channel to hear many more great stories. Let's begin with Chapter 1, Sumer. Before there were leather-bound books, before Egyptian papyrus scrolls were rolled and tied, and long before the Romans thought of compiling household registries, there was a quiet civilization recording every number, every basket of grain, every transaction, using clay and a small reed stylus. That was Sumer, the land of Sumer, part of ancient Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers flow across flat plains. The soil was fertile, the harvest steady, and people gradually gathered into villages, then cities. With food stored beyond immediate needs, they began to trade. But trade wasn't just chickens for grain, or wine for fish. It required memory, proof, and some form of record. And then, a small development changed the course of history. They began to write, but not poetry, not stories of love or war. They wrote to record grain. The Sumerians didn't believe they were inventing writing. They simply needed a way to remember how many sacks of barley Mr. Enki had delivered to the temple, or whether the potter named Lugal had truly paid back the 3 baskets of dates he'd promised. From that need to remember, humanity's first writing system, cuneiform, was born. Using a carved reed stylus, they pressed marks into wet clay tablets. The wedge-shaped impressions formed rows, each with its own meaning. A horizontal line might signify a unit. A triangle mark could represent grain. 3 marks in a row, 3 baskets. Each tablet was small, often no larger than a hand, but it carried a complete message. Who gave what to whom, and what remained unpaid. Mornings in Uruk or Lagash didn't begin with bugles or proclamations, but with the soft turning of clay tablets. The scribes, usually men, were trained from a young age in tablet schools, where they learned to press symbols evenly, memorize signs, and order them correctly. The work wasn't glamorous, but it became the backbone of an emerging bureaucratic system. In the storerooms of temples or public buildings, clay tablets were stacked in piles, each one a piece of documentation: income records, expense records, trade contracts, debt confirmations. A man might forget what he owed, but the clay would not. It waited there, silently, without haste or judgment, only to record. It was in Sumer that the first form of what we might today call an invoice appeared. They didn't use the word, but the content was unmistakable. On the 3rd day of the 4th month, Mr. Dumuzi delivered 6 jars of grape wine to the eastern storehouse. Recipient: Enlil, warehouse keeper. Quantity confirmed: 6 full jars, grade B. A simple line, but it reflected an entire system of classification, evaluation, and measurement. They even developed delegated recording authority. Not everyone could inscribe a tablet. Some only observed and reported. Some were authorized to seal documents. Some merely read them aloud. Each small function, each distinct role revealed something strikingly modern: administrative division of labour. One curious detail: they had no paper. Everything was done on clay, which, if you made a mistake, could be wiped clean with a bit of water. But once it dried, it could last thousands of years. The clay tablets of the Sumerians, rough, uncoloured and simple, still sit in museums around the world, telling stories from 3000 BCE in the silent voice of bureaucracy. No heroic victories, no radiant kings, no grand chronicles. Only 3 baskets of grain delivered. 1 jar of wine not yet returned. The potter failed to complete the promised pots. and that was enough for a society to function. Gradually, the Sumerians developed more abstract symbols, not just grain, wine, or goats, but ideas like ownership, transfer, obligation. These abstract concepts were encoded into symbols, and those symbols became formal, administrative language. No longer personal notes, these were laws, and laws weren't just reminders, they were meant to be enforced. Not everyone loves paperwork, but paperwork is what gave shape to ideas like the state, governance, and public responsibility. And that foundation began in Sumer. If you could return to ancient Mesopotamia, on a gentle May afternoon, you might find a man sitting cross-legged in a small room. In front of him, a flat slab of clay, a reed stylus, and a focused gaze. He's not a poet, not a prophet. He is a scribe, and he is writing 8 jars of honey, delivered to the southern storehouse. Deliverer Ninazu, recorded by scribe Namu. And at the southern storehouse, another man would take that tablet and match it to the physical jars. If it matched, he'd take a small carved seal, made of wood or stone, and stamp it onto the tablet's corner. That mark meant agreement, approval, authentication. That was the beginning of a bureaucracy, one we still inherit today. As a society grows alongside its grain stores and trade networks, so too does the growth of disagreements. And wherever there is disagreement, there will be efforts to resolve it, not with force, but with records. Just as we sign rental agreements or loan contracts today, the Sumerians had a clear concept of what we would now call a documented agreement. A piece of paper, or clay, cannot speak, but it can testify. Around 2600 BCE, in the city of Lagash, a clay tablet was inscribed outlining a set of terms between two parties. A landowner agreed to lease a plot of farmland to a farmer for one harvest season. The tenant was required to pay 30% of the yield to the landowner. If there was a drought, the figure would drop to 15%. The deal was handwritten by a scribe, encoded in cuneiform, and included witnesses. Witnesses were listed at the end of the tablet, not merely as observers, but as a mandatory component for the contract to be valid. They were often respected members of the community, village elders, guards, or senior scribes. The wording was clear, the layout standardized, and finally, a seal was applied. That seal was cylindrical, a sophisticated and deeply personal invention. The Sumerians didn't sign their names. Instead, they rolled a small engraved cylinder across the soft clay. As it turned, it left behind a strip of images, perhaps a protective deity, a profession symbol, or a distinctive pattern recognised by all. Such a seal was not easily forged. It was a signature, an endorsement, a piece of evidence. And so administrative writing evolved beyond simple remembrance. It became an instrument of enforcement. A clay tablet could compel someone to deliver goods, repay a debt, or prove they had fulfilled an obligation. Didn't follow through? You went to the court, where someone would read the tablet aloud, symbol by symbol. The answer didn't come from emotion. It came from writing. Over time, the Sumerians went even further. Not just economic transactions, they wrote inheritance documents. A father could designate his eldest son to inherit all his lands, but still had to specify who would tend the date grove, who would maintain the family altar. Some tablets detailed how a small house was to be split in two, marked with wooden stakes. Each stake bore a name, inscribed in clay. This attention to detail didn't stem from a love of paperwork. It arose from the need to prevent conflict. A particularly notable tablet, excavated in the city of Umma and now housed in the Louvre Museum, records a legal dispute between two merchants over a shipment of fabric delivered in the wrong type. The document specifies that the requested material was raw woolen cloth, but what was delivered was a linen blend. The text spans nearly 30 lines of cuneiform, with about 10 signs per line. No one rushed, no one shouted. Everything was written down, waiting for judgment. And because everything had to be recorded, scribes began developing administrative handbooks. They preserved standard phrases, commonly used signs, and proper contract structures. From this arose something quite unusual: bureaucratic standardization. Every tablet had to follow a set format. Layouts were taught in scribe schools, where instructors drilled students on each mark, the angle of each wedge. Precision became a professional virtue. Cuneiform, those once small impressions, grew into a complete written language. The Sumerians had thousands of symbols, enough to talk about property, taxes, labour, food, and even rituals. But more than anything, this language wasn't developed to talk to each other. It was designed to speak to the system. Sumerian clay tablets had no decorative elements. They were coarse, heavy, fragile. But because of that, they were honest, hard to fake, impossible to alter once dried. A single carving error ruined a document. It had to be remade from scratch. This gave rise to a culture of write it right the first time. And from that, a bureaucracy that could be trusted. The Sumerians weren't the only civilization to write on clay, but they were the first to use writing to govern society. Not just observation, but binding terms, formal documents verified with seals. And thus, from a small valley nestled between two rivers, where people once pressed little triangle shapes into clay to count goats, began a long journey. A journey of dry, dusty documents that preserved fairness, clarity, and above all, collective memory. Over the millennia, administrative records would change names. Some would be called edicts, others transcripts, some directives, others requests. But no matter the title, they all trace back to the first clay tablets of Sumer, where humans wrote not to speak, but so they would not be forgotten. Chapter 2. Egypt. After the Sumerians laid the first brick for handwritten administration on clay tablets, history was ready for a new transition. Lighter, longer, and easier to roll up. This was the birth of a writing material that transformed the entire ancient world: papyrus. The Nile Delta wasn't just fertile for growing wheat and raising cattle, it was also home to a special plant, the papyrus plant. Tall, supple, and easily peeled into thin strips. When those strips were lightly pounded, layered perpendicularly, and pressed, they formed a flat surface suitable for writing. No more pressing wedge marks into clay. The Egyptians could now write with ink and reed pens, drawing elegant flowing lines, curved like the Nile winding through the early morning fields. Papyrus was a revolution. It was light, portable, and it could be rolled into scrolls. A document was no longer confined to the palm of a hand like Sumerian clay tablets. It could stretch for meters. Tax records, copies of royal decrees, lists of grain supplies, building materials. All could be neatly rolled, stored in wooden boxes, or laid on stone shelves. In large temples like Karnak, or in the storerooms of pyramids still under construction, a quiet class of scribes worked behind the scenes. They were not priests, not warriors, but held a central role, preserving the administrative memory of the kingdom. Under the pharaohs, everything was recorded: the number of bricks delivered each day, the labourers working the morning shift, the fish caught in Lake Fayum, even the amount of beer distributed at festivals. Nothing was too small to note. The Egyptians had a special term for scribes: sesh, meaning those who know writing. Not everyone was taught to write. Literacy was a privilege, passed down through families or taught in special temple schools. A skilled sesh could rise to the ranks of officialdom. They were the bridge between the people and the state, between the divine and the mundane, and their reed pen didn't just record speech, it created law. Pens were made from reeds, their tips carefully shaved. Ink was a mix of soot and water, thickened with tree resin to prevent fading. Papyrus absorbed ink quickly, but was fragile when wet, so document preservation became a skill in itself. Once written, each scroll was sun-dried, then gently rolled and stored in leather tubes or wooden cases. In large archives, Scrolls were categorized by subject: agricultural taxes, ration distributions, pyramid builder rosters, land transactions. During the reign of Pharaoh Ramses II, the administrative system reached remarkable complexity. Each province, called a nome, had its own administrative office. Every office had a team of scribes, copying directives from the capital and sending weekly reports back. A typical report might include rainfall measurements, harvest yields, current labour force, expenditures for feasts or funerals, and even the case of a missing cow. Interestingly, the level of detail wasn't a sign of complexity, it was a symbol of stability. For the Egyptians, documentation wasn't just for management, it was for eternity. In tombs, people were often buried with scrolls stating their names, lineage, good deeds, and prayers to the gods. These were a form of afterlife paperwork. In the Book of the Dead, the deceased had to declare that they had lived rightly, had not stolen, lied, or falsified records. Even in death, administration followed. Scribes weren't mere clerks, they were role models. In many surviving paintings, scribes are shown sitting cross-legged, holding papyrus sheets with ink palettes and pens beside them, their eyes focused, unwavering. They carried no swords, but they shaped the flow of law, wealth, and power. A papyrus document was considered official when it had three key elements: clear handwriting, an identifier of the writer, usually a signature or symbol, and a witness. Some scrolls even included an affirmation at the end: "I have witnessed this, and it is true." They believed truth must be written so that it could exist beyond spoken words. Perhaps what made Egyptian administrative records so admirable was this: they were traditional without being stagnant. For over 1,000 years they used papyrus, wrote in hieroglyphic or hieratic scripts, and maintained ritualized recording practices. But the content kept expanding, from agricultural records to architectural plans, from food distributions to embalming procedures. All stored in scrolls, one joined to the next, like the Nile flowing through generations of pharaohs. And so, Egyptian administrative writing was not just a tool, it was the silent current of a civilization, not a crashing flood, not a noisy surge, but a quiet force carrying the memory of an entire people. When the pyramids stand still in the sun, when the stone lions at the gates gaze silently into the horizon, somewhere inside, a small archive room may still hold a single scroll, handwritten, unadorned, telling that on the 10th day of the second month of the 17th year, under the reign of Seti, 30 sacks of grain were delivered to the southern granary. Writer Sesh-Nefer witnessed the fourth priest of the Temple of Amun. Beneath the shadows of Egypt's colossal temple columns, amid the steady footsteps of priests and the rhythmic prayers rising to the gods, there were always those who did a job never meant to be read aloud. They copied documents, not prophecies, not grand epics, but short, precise, and unequivocal lines. Who owed whom, how much, when it must be paid, and what would happen if it wasn't. The ancient Egyptians did not merely write to manage, they wrote to bind society with documents that held legal weight. Among the surviving papyrus scrolls today, many are contracts for land sales, marriage agreements, property declarations, and inheritance confirmations. These documents are not ornate, they avoid metaphor, yet they are powerful. Every line is a commitment. Every word written is treated like a vow spoken before the gods. A typical contract might begin: in the 13th year of the reign of Pharaoh Thutmose III, on the 17th day of the month of the inundation, the stonemason Kenher purchased a house from the farmer Panki for 6 jars of beer and 3 ingots of red copper. Simple wording, but followed by detailed terms: the house's location, boundary markers, witnesses, payment method, and finally the scribe's affirmation and the official seal of the local administration. What made Egyptian legal documents unique was their inclusion of spiritual warnings, a kind of oath that those who broke the agreement would be noted by the god Thoth denied entry into the afterlife, or have their soul weigh heavier during the heart-weighing ceremony with the feather of Ma'at. Law, then, was enforced not just through earthly penalties, but through sacred consequence. In marriage agreements, both husband and wife had rights. One document discovered in Deir el-Medina, the village of the pyramid builders, states clearly, the husband agrees to provide financial support upon divorce, and the wife retains all property she brought into the marriage. This wasn't necessarily national law, but it proves that administrative documents were used to protect individual rights, even within Egypt's rigid social hierarchy. To manage the ever-growing number of records, the Egyptians developed a relatively systematic archive system. Temple scribes and court archivists were responsible for the storage, classification, and retrieval of documents. These archives, called per-medjat, meaning house of documents, were cool, thick-walled, dimly lit rooms. Inside were simple wooden shelves where papyrus scrolls were sorted by subject or reign. Among the most renowned archives was the Library of the Ramesseum, the mortuary temple of Ramses II. It is believed to be one of the earliest administrative archive centres in the world. Hundreds of scrolls were kept here: tax records, population lists, building logs, even daily government journals. Some fragments survive to this day, with slanted, steady handwriting, as if still drying under the Nile sun. One of the most remarkable scrolls, preserved almost entirely, is the Wilbur Papyrus, a comprehensive land and tax registry from a southern Egyptian province. Over 18 metres long, it lists hundreds of land plots, owners, crop types, and associated tax rates. It reads like an ancient version of a land title ledger, showcasing how Egyptians tracked every field, every patch of farmland with astonishing precision. This commitment to transparency and standardization in administrative writing helped sustain Egypt's state apparatus for thousands of years. A low-level clerk in Thebes could write documents in the exact format used by an official in Memphis. Templates were standardized, symbols were unified. A request to convert farmland into pasture would follow the same structure regardless of where it was written across the delta. Even royal documents, decrees from the pharaoh, followed bureaucratic convention, beginning with the full royal name, followed by the reason for the decree, the main text, and ending with blessings from Ra or Ma'at, deities representing justice and cosmic balance. Thus, administration was no longer the silent background of power, it was its public voice, the written proof that the palace cared about the grain harvest, that the gods approved the newly issued law, and that every person, farmer or priest, was acknowledged by paperwork. When Egypt entered its final eras, conquered by the Greeks, then the Romans, administrative writing did not disappear. Egyptian scribes began incorporating Greek into their work, blending the new language with the old system. A land transfer document from the 1st century BCE was written in 3 languages: hieroglyphic, Demotic, popular Egyptian script, and Greek. From this trilingual format, modern archaeologists deciphered the entire Egyptian writing system, thanks to the Rosetta Stone. Not all papyri survived. Many decayed, were eroded, or destroyed by war and time. But what remains, even a torn fragment, a partial line, says this: the Egyptians wrote to remember, to govern, and to endure. Chapter 3. Greece. As the morning sun rose over the grey-white rooftops of Athens, casting light through the marble columns of the Temple of Athena, life in the ancient Greek city-state began, not only with rhetoric, not only with philosophical debate, but also with administrative records, carved in stone, written on wood, or copied by hand on papyrus imported from Egypt. Unlike Sumer, where administration grew out of temple systems, and unlike Egypt, where the centralized state controlled all documentation, the Greeks, especially in Athens, marked a turning point. They administrativized civic life. Every free citizen of the polis not only had the right to live, but also the obligation to register, pay taxes, and participate in political affairs, all of which were managed through documentation. An Athenian citizen was not just a symbolic notion. Citizens were named, had their ancestry verified, and were assigned to a deme, the basic administrative unit. Citizen lists were handwritten, copied repeatedly, and kept in public places for all to inspect. This was not administrative secrecy, as in many later societies. In Athens, documents were public, meant for scrutiny, comparison, and debate. Each year, the city-states appointed a group of special civil servants called grammateis, scribes. They weren't merely secretaries, they were pillars of Athenian democracy. At meetings of the Council of 400 or the People's Assembly, ecclesia, they would sit near the speaker's platform, wax tablets or papyrus in hand, recording all discussions. What was spoken and decided would then be transcribed, verified, and, if passed as law, permanently carved into stone. Some of these stone inscriptions still survive, standing in museums or resting beneath the soil of the ancient agora. Their letters remain sharp. On the 10th day of the month of Hekatombion, in the 6th year of the archonship of Euclides, the people decreed. Not just notes. These were monuments of communal power, written by hand, carved by hand, and preserved in stone. Athens' system of taxation and property management was also maintained through a complex web of records. Citizens had to declare assets, income, and rental holdings. These declarations, called apographae, were submitted to the financial council. Those who failed to report were fined, and in some cases their property confiscated. Remarkably, these filings weren't sealed in secrecy. They were copied and stored at administrative centres, where any citizen had the right to read them. Just as Athenians had citizen-led courts, where plaintiffs and defendants argued their own cases without professional lawyers, they believed that truth belonged to the community, and documents were tools to uphold it. All trial records, verdicts, and accusations were handwritten, sealed, and kept in wooden chests at the court. There was even a profession, scribes for hire, who wrote indictments for citizens unable to write, fluently. Another fascinating detail, how Athens managed military registration. When a young man came of age, he had to register with his deme, verify lineage through his father and uncle, and have his name added to a list called the Pinax. This list was publicly posted, and without your name on it, you weren't legally a citizen. To legally exist in Athens, your name had to be written down. Writing also reached into religious life. During festivals like Panathenaia or Dionysia, participant rosters, offerings to the gods, and inventories of sacred gifts were all recorded. Temple keepers weren't just ritual leaders, they were also guardians of sacred records, to be reviewed by later priests, ensuring nothing had been overlooked. And not only in Athens, in other city-states like Delphi, Sparta, or Thebes, though systems varied, record-keeping remained essential. Some regions used wooden tablets, etched with fire or sharp blades. Others used small clay tokens, called ostraka, to record names of those up for exile. A particularly unique democratic practice in Athens was ostracism by writing. Each citizen wrote the name of someone they wished to expel on a small shard. If a person's name appeared too frequently, they were forced to leave Athens for 10 years. No trial, just writing. Thus, the ancient Greeks did not build administration as a tool of oppression. They built it as an infrastructure for transparency and civic life. Documents didn't belong to a ruling class. They were public property. They were read aloud in the agora. They were posted in public spaces. They were written in a language the people could understand. If you walked into the ancient agora on a summer afternoon, stepped across sun-warmed stones still bearing sandal marks, and sat beneath the shade of an olive tree, you might have seen a man writing quietly. In front of him, a roll of papyrus. Beside him, a small jar of ink, its resinous scent still fresh. He was not transcribing Homeric poetry. He was recording the minutes of a civic meeting, to be carved into stone the next day, for all of Athens to see. And so, in the heart of a city-state where philosophers debated human nature, where artists sculpted gods from marble, there existed a quiet class, not loud, not argumentative, who wrote. They wrote to preserve the people's voice. They wrote to remind citizens of their rights. They wrote so that truth would not be forgotten. If there is one thing that made the administrative system of ancient Greece resilient, it was not just the act of writing, but the way documents were copied, stored, and distributed. Unlike civilizations that relied solely on a specialized scribal class, the ancient Greeks, especially in Athens, developed a model of shared administration. When a decree was passed by the People's Assembly, it wasn't just carved once in stone and placed in the town square. At least 3 handwritten copies were made, one kept in the public archives, one sent to the relevant deme, local administrative unit, and one retained for verification in case of dispute. This copying was carried out by a group of part-time scribes known as antigraphies, meaning those who rewrite. They worked in small rooms near the agora or within the tholos, a round building where the executive council, Prytaneis, met daily. The antigraphies did not merely transcribe, they were expected to understand the content to avoid an errors. A small mistake, like an incorrect meeting date or property amount, could alter the document's legal force entirely. Because of this, the Greeks developed an administrative standard for formatting documents. The first line recorded the dates according to the city-state calendar, followed by the names of officials, the decision-makers, and then the main content. Paragraphs were separated by special symbols, often a double dot or a slightly wider space. These standards were never formally codified, but became a habitual, unwritten law of Greek documentation. Another key element was the metroon, the public archive. Located on the west side of the agora, next to the temple of the Mother of the Gods, the metroon was not just a storage space for official state documents. It was a place where citizens could request access to records, search for information, or file complaints. Inside the metroon, documents were classified by year, event, and subject. There were shelves for tax ledgers, for laws, and for birth declarations. Records created when a child was formally accepted as a citizen. Older documents were rolled, tagged with string, and labelled with their main topic at the front for easy reference. In a society where every citizen had the right to ask questions, the archive was not locked away. It functioned like an ancient data centre, archaic but effective. Anyone could walk in and ask to see a decree from 424 BCE, or a contract for renting boats for a festival. Reading was free. The only requirement was literacy, something Athenians were encouraged to learn from a young age. Beyond civil matters, the Greeks also meticulously recorded military and alliance finances. One of the most famous organisations was the Delian League, led by Athens, which brought together many smaller city-states to defend against Persia. Each member had to contribute gold, silver, or ships, and every contribution was precisely recorded. These contributions were publicly engraved on large stone slabs called stelae, erected at the Temple of Athena on the Acropolis. Each city-state, each donation, each year, clearly displayed. Not for boasting, but to embody financial transparency. No hidden clauses, no secret recordings. Everything was written and made visible to all. The Athenians also practiced annual auditing, called euthenai. After each term of office, public officials had to submit their records to a special citizen board for review. If discrepancies or losses were found, the case went to court. Every number recorded was not a dull figure. It was evidence of civic ethics. Greek administrative writing wasn't as ornate as Egyptian calligraphy or as forceful as Sumerian cuneiform. But it was approachable, consistent, and honest. In contracts for renting land, buying grapes, selling boats, or exchanging milk for grain, the writing stayed simple. Names, goods exchanged, terms, witnesses, and a closing affirmation. Even in everyday culture, the Greeks made writing part of life. Personal letters, called epistolae, were not just private messages. Often they were administrative requests, negotiation letters, or transaction confirmations. Writers frequently kept a copy, not out of forgetfulness, but because they trusted written memory more than human memory. One might imagine, on a breezy morning in the Athens marketplace, a man pulling a small scroll from his cloak. He would slowly unroll it, holding each edge firmly. Inside, in slanted handwriting and faded brown ink, was a contract his father once signed about a small garden beside the river Ilissos. That copy had stayed with his family for 3 generations. No frame, no lawyer, just the act of reading it slowly and believing that written words do not lie. And through this habit, the Greeks passed on to the world a simple yet powerful idea. Documents are the embodiment of justice, the memory of the collective, and the responsibility of all. They don't shout, they don't boast, but they're always there, on stone, on paper, in worn wooden drawers, and in the minds of those who know how to read. Chapter 4. The Roman Empire. If the Sumerians invented writing to remember, the Egyptians used documents to sanctify power, and the Greeks turned administration into a function of citizenship, then the Romans went further. They used writing to control an entire empire. At its height, the Roman Empire stretched from the cold coasts of Britain across the deserts of Syria to the fertile plains of Egypt. Nearly 100 million people lived in lands under Roman rule, and what kept that vast machine from collapsing was not just the military, it was administrative paperwork. The Roman Empire ran on the foundation of what was written down. Every citizen, every slave, every merchant, every legionary existed legally because of a document. No name in the census registry. You were not a citizen. No license. You could not trade. No discharge certificate. You could not receive land from the state. By the 1st century BCE, the Romans had developed a periodic population registration system called the census. Every 5 years, special officials, called censors, travelled through provinces collecting data: name, age, occupation, property, number of children, and marital status. Each adult male had to stand before an official bench, state his name, declare his holdings and swear an oath, while scribes wrote everything down by hand. Once entered into the census records, you weren't just a citizen, you were now bound by obligations, taxes, military service when needed, and compliance with Roman law. Your name would appear in copies sent back to Rome, stored in administrative offices at the tabularium, the central archive building located on the Capitoline Hill. The tabularium was one of the first buildings in history constructed solely to store documents. A massive stone structure with long corridors, vaulted ceilings, and countless rooms housing documents in wooden chests, clay jars, or leather scrolls. Here, texts from across the empire arrived. Land records from Hispania, military reports from Britannia, legal complaints from Syria, and tax contracts from Egypt. Roman documents weren't just recorded, they were meticulously categorized. Some belonged to res publica, public matters, others to res privata, private property. Some were edicta, official proclamations, some rescripta, responses from the emperor, and others senatus consulta, senate resolutions. A common citizen in Pompeii could receive a letter from Emperor Trajan himself if he submitted a land request correctly. Remarkably, the emperor didn't need to see you in person. A well-written petition, sealed and routed correctly, could change your life. In Rome, a document could cross both distance and status. The Roman administrative system was highly practical. For temporary writing, they used wax tablets, tabulae caratae, wooden frames filled with wax, reusable and erasable. More formal documents were copied onto parchment, prepared animal skin, or papyrus imported from Egypt. When a contract was created, be it for buying property, selling slaves, marriage, or land allocation, 2 identical versions were made, rolled, tied with cord, and sealed with wax. The Romans had a subtle genius. A seal was as powerful as a signature. Each wax seal bore a unique imprint, depicting a warrior, deity, or family crest. If the seal broke, the document became invalid. No lengthy litigation required. Just this: the seal must remain intact. In a society that valued order, the Romans used documents to define everything. On every tombstone was a short inscription: name, age, date of death, and a farewell message. Every oil amphora bore a stamp indicating origin. Every coin had tiny text showing the ruling emperor. Nothing went unwritten. Even Roman soldiers, often seen as uneducated, had to carry a diploma, a small metal tablet stating their name, birthplace, legion, and years of service. Upon completing their duty, the document was returned with an official seal, granting them land or citizenship rights for their family. A Roman's military achievement was not commemorated with medals, but with paperwork. Gradually, Roman administration expanded into religious affairs. Temples were required to record expenditures, catalogue offerings, and report numbers of worshippers. Some priests were tasked with documenting ritual calendars, not for announcements, but so that no ceremony would be forgotten. An unrecorded ritual held no value. Documents also shaped private life. Want a divorce? You needed a certified statement. Adopting a child? You needed 2 witnesses and a handwritten form. Changing your name? You had to file a request and await a reply. From birth to death, a Roman's life was accompanied by writing. And thanks to those writings, their history survives today. In the remains of Pompeii, a city buried in volcanic ash in 79 CE, archaeologists discovered hundreds of small wooden tablets recording commercial contracts, inventory lists, and personal letters. These simple writings on fragile materials are some of the clearest proof that documents were not just records, but living memory. If one had walked under the arches of the Forum Romanum on an early morning, while officials unrolled scrolls, reviewed tax records from the province of Gallia, and corrected census data, one would realise Rome was not built by stone alone, but also by writing. Without documents, there would be no Rome. Without administration, there would be no empire. Among the countless achievements Rome left to the world, there is one that may seem mundane, easily forgotten, yet no less important than the empire's stone roads, limestone arenas, or bridges crossing the Tiber. That achievement is law, not just as a set of principles, but as a structured system of written documents, recorded, preserved, and passed from one generation to the next. The Romans did not view law as the whim of a monarch, nor as a sacred privilege granted by the gods. To them, law must be written clearly, placed in public view, and accessible to all citizens. From this belief, in 449 BCE, they erected the 12 Tables, Lex Duodecim Tabularum, Rome's first written code of law, inscribed on 12 bronze tablets and displayed at the centre of the forum. No one had to memorise it, people just had to read it. Or at least know that, if needed, the law could be pointed to in writing, not spoken by the voice of the powerful. From the Republic to the Empire, Roman law continued to be systematised. Each time a new statute was passed, an imperial decree issued, or a senatorial decision made, it was written down and given a specific designation. Lex, a law passed by the popular assembly. Senatus consultum, a decree from the Senate. Constitutio principis, an imperial command. Rescriptum, a formal written reply from the emperor to a citizen or community. Edictum, an administrative edict from a local magistrate. These documents didn't vanish into the passage of time. They were copied, distributed to the provinces, archived in Rome, and most importantly, periodically compiled. One of the largest legal compilations in Roman history was the Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law, issued by Emperor Justinian in the 6th century CE. This massive code, containing thousands of entries, was more than law. It was the administrative memory of an entire empire, written so it would never be forgotten. Alongside the growth of legal texts came a new professional class, the notarii, notaries. Unlike ordinary scribes, notarii were not just copyists. They had the legal authority to witness and certify transactions. When a contract was drawn up, be it for land purchase, marriage, adoption, or last will, a notarius had to be present to draft the document in standardised form, confirm the understanding of all parties, and affix the legal seal. A notarised document often began with a formal preamble. Before me, Gaius Severus, notary of the city of Lugdunum. The parties listed below appeared on the 13th day of the month of Sextilis, in the 8th year of the reign of Hadrianus. Though ceremonial in tone, this opening served as a key to legal protection. If one party breached the contract, the notarised document would stand as evidence in court. Notaries had their own offices, usually located near forums, courts, or main marketplaces. They drafted rough versions on wax tablets, then transcribed final copies onto parchment or papyrus. Wealthier citizens might even hire a tabularius, a private record keeper, to manage their archives. And it wasn't just the elite. Ordinary people needed documents too. A potter and his wife dividing their assets before a long trading trip. A soldier preparing a will before deployment. A freed slave formalising his manumission. All went to the notarius, and all were written down. In Roman society, writing was protection, a legal armour for the vulnerable. At a higher level, written documents were the mechanism for central control. Provincial governors, prefectus, proconsul, or legatus, were required to send regular reports to Rome. These reports included population data, tax revenue, number of stationed troops, internal disputes or proposed legislation. Each report followed a standardised format, delivered by horse or courier ship, and was stored in the Imperial Central Archive. Late submissions, incorrect formatting, or false reporting could lead to serious consequences. In the hands of the Romans, writing was no longer just a record-keeping tool. It was a tool of power, of control, of transparency. Every administrative document had a standardised template. Every seal carried legal authority. Every archive was catalogued. And if one looks closely, all of this formed the foundation of the modern administrative state. When the Roman Empire fell in the 5th century CE, many libraries were destroyed, and countless documents were lost. And yet, astonishingly, the Roman administrative method survived. It was adopted by post-Roman kingdoms. It influenced the clerical systems of the church. And well into the Middle Ages, notaries were still called notarius, an echo from the distant city of Rome. Today, when you notarise a document, read a contract, or sign a birth certificate, you may not think of Rome, but within every line, every seal, every affirmation, lives the shadow of a civilization that used writing to bind time and brought the world into order through paper. Chapter 5. The Middle Ages. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, an administrative system once thought to be near perfect crumbled with it. Stone roads cracked, libraries were burned or abandoned, and countless administrative records, once carefully stored in the tabularium, were lost amidst waves of invasions, territorial disputes, and shifting crowns. And yet, astonishingly, administrative writing did not disappear. It withdrew into a place no one might expect, the church. During centuries of chaos, the only institution that preserved the light of knowledge and a semblance of administrative order was the Roman Catholic Church. In monasteries scattered across Europe, between cold stone walls and flickering candlelight, Benedictine and Augustinian monks quietly copied texts. But they didn't just copy the Bible. They also copied legal documents, land records, correspondence, and the church's tax ledgers. In a disordered world, record-keeping became power. Each major monastery had a dedicated room, the scriptorium, where monks worked solely on transcription. These scriptors sat in rows, before sheets of stretched parchment with pots of black and red ink, sharpened goose quills, and a sample manuscript to copy. They wrote letter by letter, carefully and patiently, sometimes taking weeks to finish a single scroll. The church's administrative system was unlike that of the Roman Empire, but it quietly rebuilt a new form of order. From the 7th century onward, every diocese maintained a liber censualis, a register of lands and tithes. It detailed every piece of land owned by the church, who was cultivating it, the yield per season, and the portion to be paid. People offered grain, wine, or money to the monasteries not only out of faith, but because they knew everything was recorded, and in times of dispute, say, someone refusing to pay tithes or arguing over land rights, the written document would be brought forth and read aloud before the village community. There were no royal courts, no state officials, only a handwritten record, the red wax seal of the abbot, and a community that believed in writing as much as they believed in God. What made this era special was that writing became a sacred act. A monk copying a land registry was not merely a clerk, he was a guardian of divine order. To write inaccurately wasn't just a legal mistake, it was a sin. Because if church property wasn't managed properly, who would distribute food to the poor? Who would maintain fairness in a world where kings changed with the seasons? In the archives of Cluny Abbey in France and Monte Cassino in Italy, thousands of detailed records survive. Who borrowed straw to patch their roof? Who asked for half a sack of flour during a harsh winter? Who traded 2 sheep for a prayer for their deceased relative? Everything could become a line of text, handwritten and preserved. The church also developed a network of correspondence, the primary administrative communication between bishops, archbishops, and the Vatican. These letters, called epistolae, were often sealed with lead or soft wax, bearing the keys of St. Peter, and written in Latin using a set format. An official salutation, reason for the letter, main content, and final blessing. These were not merely messages, they held administrative authority. From the 9th century, popes began issuing official decrees called papal bulls, named after the lead seal, bulla, affixed to them. Each bull was a formal command, granting rights, prohibitions, or affirming property ownership. From that point onward, the church became the largest administrative organisation in Europe, capable of recording, coordinating, and managing affairs from the Vatican to the smallest chapel in England. In fact, in 1086, when King William of England commissioned the famous Domesday Book, a comprehensive land survey, he did not employ royal officials. He employed monks, those who could write, measure land and create forms, most of whom had been trained in monasteries. Under the church's guidance, administrative documents became slow, solemn, and ceremonial. A land use confirmation could be written on calfskin parchment, sealed with red hemp twine, and stored in a wooden box carved with biblical verses. Not out of show, but out of belief. If something was written and blessed, it would become part of the eternal order. Thus, in the darkest centuries, when war, plague, and conquest intertwined, people could still come to a small church and ask to see a land deed, a marriage contract, or a tithe agreement from 30 years prior. Because in that place, documents still lived, not in bold black ink, but in the slow memory of the human hand. As the spires of churches rose above the forests and fields of medieval Europe, beside them began to emerge cold stone castles, with thick walls, drawbridges, dungeons, and a new ruling class, the feudal lords. While the church preserved the light of knowledge and sacred record-keeping, kings and nobles took hold of worldly powers, taxation, land, and the right to govern people. And all of that required documents. The unified system of Rome was gone. The secular Middle Ages were a patchwork of overlapping powers and paperwork, where a royal decree could contradict a papal bull, and an oath of fealty might be written, stored, and later judged in court. In major kingdoms like England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire, monarchs began rebuilding administration, not on the imperial model, but through the structure of feudal domains. Land was granted in fiefs, each ruled by a duke, count, or local lord who represented royal authority. But that authority wasn't absolute. To be valid, it had to be backed by written documents. A noble seeking to be recognised as a landholder needed a royal charter. A monastery claiming tax exemption required a formal privilege, stored in the royal library. A city seeking autonomy had to negotiate and sign a municipal charter, Carta Communitatis. Everything had to be written, sealed, and archived. From the 12th century onward, royal courts established official chancery offices, known as the chancery, where all administrative tasks were conducted through writing. Royal scribes, called clerici regis, were often church-educated men who served the crown. They composed diplomatic letters, recorded decrees, copied treaties, and managed the king's registers, rotuli regii, in England beginning with King Henry II. The pipe rolls were introduced, detailed annual tax records, written on long rolls of calfskin, rolled up like smoking pipes, hence the name. Each roll listed tax amounts from every county, the names of collectors, debts owed, and royal expenses for festivals, wars, or castle repairs. These detailed records, repeated year after year, became the backbone of royal finance. In France, especially under the Capetian dynasty, kings issued chartes de franchise, charters granting special privileges to towns and regions. A town might gain the right to hold markets, levy taxes, or elect its own council, but only if it held a document of royal approval. These charters were handwritten in black ink, sealed in red wax, and stored in iron chests kept inside the town's cathedral. Perhaps the most famous example of the power of written documents in secular medieval Europe is the Magna Carta, the Great Charter of England, signed in 1215. Under pressure from his barons, King John was forced to sign an agreement limiting his own power and affirming legal rights for nobles and the church. The document was brief, just a few dozen lines, but it marked a profound turning point in Western legal history, and it survives to this day because it was written down, copied, and stored in multiple places, making it impossible to ignore. This era also saw the rise of local administration. In commercial cities like Venice, Genoa, Bruges, or Lubeck, city councils had their own offices for recording local laws, trade taxes, guild rosters, and court rulings. A merchant wanting to open a wool shop needed a license from the council. Someone wishing to join the Bakers Guild had to pass a skills test and be registered by name, and if anyone violated the rules, penalties would be based on signed documents. In feudal territories, the first administrative maps appeared, not geographic maps but maps of power. Who owned which land? Who had hunting rights in which forest? Who could draw water from which stream? These maps were often hand-drawn, marked with family crests and attached to noble grants, tribute records, or oaths of fealty. And so, in an age of constant warfare, plagues and power rooted in force, paperwork still endured, a fragile but essential safeguard. Land grants were stored in wooden chests, city charters hung in council chambers, tax records were reread before the harvest. Not because people fully trusted fairness, but because they knew, if nothing was written, nothing truly existed. Feudal administrative writing was not uniform. It lacked standardization. It could be chaotic. It could be forged. But in a disordered world, it was the only way to fix meaning. A few lines of text, a wax seal, a strip of parchment could stand between war and peace, between ownership and loss. As the sun set behind the stone domes of churches and monastery bells rang in the evening wind, an era was quietly transforming. Not with swords, not with revolutions, but with writing. In the late Middle Ages, roughly from the 13th to the 15th century, Europe entered a critical, transitional period. The old division between church and secular authority was no longer as clear as before. In its place emerged a shared space, where administrative writing became a common language between both powers. A monastery might store royal charters. A royal court might cite papal decrees. And both institutions used the same types of records: land, taxes, and people. During this period, a new element began playing a central role in the administrative system: education. At newly founded universities such as Bologna, Paris, Oxford, and Salamanca, students no longer studied just philosophy or theology. Law, particularly revived Roman law, ius commune, became a foundation of elite training. Students learned to write contracts, record court proceedings, and draft official documents in standardized formats. From these schools arose formality and uniformity in documentation, no longer varying wildly from place to place. A late medieval administrative document typically followed a nearly fixed structure. A title identifying the document type: letter, decree, contract. The official designation of the issuer. The reason or cause for the document's issuance. The main content often itemized by clauses. A conclusion, including blessings or declarations of legal validity. Signatures, seals, and dates. Whether written in Latin or the vernacular, this format was respected, replicated, and taught across generations. Writing correctly was no longer a skill, it was a requirement for legal recognition. In this context, the role of monastic schools, especially those of the Franciscans and Dominicans, became crucial. These orders trained thousands to read, write, organise, and archive documents. Many graduates became royal secretaries, local officials, or legal advisors. And they brought with them the disciplines of the church: write evenly, write carefully, preserve carefully. At the local level, administrative offices, such as town halls, feudal courts, and notary bureaus, began systematic record keeping. The notarial registers, registries des notaires, from 14th century France, Italy, and Spain, contained thousands of contracts, wills, and petitions, each numbered, indexed, and copied multiple times. One copy for the state, one for the parties involved, one for the archives. In Germany, the emergence of Stadtbücher, city books, documented everything from municipal laws and legal judgments to tax rolls. In Venice, the chancery system became so sophisticated that one could retrieve a shipping contract from 50 years earlier in just a few days, using a unique reference code. But perhaps the most profound, quiet revolution was this: administrative writing began to shift from handwriting to printing. In 1450, when Johannes Gutenberg completed the first movable type printing press in Mainz, he didn't print the Bible first. He printed standardized administrative forms and religious documents. Flyers, decrees, tax calendars, and official notices were now mass-produced, not copied by hand. This didn't just save time, it marked the end of dependence on the scribe, and the beginning of a new era, one in which the standard of a document was no longer tradition, but typeface. A printed document, with even letters, uniform ink, and precise layout, became the new symbol of legitimacy. People began trusting printed texts more than manuscripts. A royal printed edict, even from far away, held authority. A printed tax notice posted on a village gate became official information. By the end of the 15th century, every major European city had its own printing press. And administration, once a quiet function behind curtains, now had a stronger, clearer voice. Not because the content had changed, but because the method of communication had. And so, as the Middle Ages drew to a close, yielding to the dawn of the Renaissance, those rolls of parchment, wax seals, printed forms, and tabulated records had already laid the foundation for a new world. A world in which everything important had to be written down, standardized, clearly printed, and preserved, not just for reference, but to affirm its existence. Chapter 6. The Early Modern Period. As the sun rose over the red-tiled roofs of Florence and shone through the bell towers of Baroque churches, The old world of feudalism had begun to crack, but it did not vanish with the roar of cannons or the fall of castles. It faded, bit by bit, under the secretary's quill, beneath wax seals pressed into parchment, and within lines of administrative writing, more numerous, more complex, and increasingly modern. The 16th century marked the emergence of the early modern nation-state bureaucracy. Renaissance dynasties such as the Habsburgs, Valois, Tudors, and Ottomans no longer ruled solely through lineage. They governed through ledgers, standardized forms, and vast networks of correspondence spanning the continent. In Spain under King Philip II, the Council of State, Consejo de Estado, was reorganized into a vast administrative machine, with secretaries assigned to specific regions: Italy, Flanders, the New World, and the homeland. Each secretary had a private office, a personal archive, and a distinct seal. Reports from colonies, written in Latin, Spanish, or even local languages, were sent regularly to Madrid, copied, stamped, received, and filed meticulously by year, category, and region. In France, kings like François I and Henri IV, beyond their love for architecture and art, reorganised the bureaucracy with increasing specialisation. Offices such as the Chambre des Comptes, Court of Audit, and the Secrétairie d'État, State Secretariat, became central hubs for document processing. Taxes, edicts, appointments, petitions, and above all, correspondence. This was the era when administrative letters became the backbone of royal authority. A king could not be everywhere at once, but he could write, or rather he could have someone write for him, seal it, and send it. Then await a reply. A reliable, verifiable cycle of correspondence formed the very skeleton of governance. Letters flowed from king to provincial governors, from governors to bishops, from bishops to town councils, then circled back to Paris or Madrid. This ongoing cycle created a bureaucratic bloodstream of written power. Alongside the correspondence came the early postal systems, especially in the Holy Roman Empire. From the time of Maximilian I, a network of relay stations, called Reitstation, was established, spaced a few dozen kilometres apart. Letters were passed by courier from hand to hand, crossing mountain passes, rivers, and feudal lands. And every official letter was accompanied by a backup copy, kept at the origin in case of loss. Slowly, the state learned a vital lesson: duplicate everything. Thus, official duplicates became standard. One copy to send, one to keep, one for disputes, one for the central archive. Offices began stamping documents originale, original, and copia vera, true copy, a seemingly simple habit that laid the foundation for state data systems. Letters, reports, forms, everything became formatted. The first standard administrative forms emerged: registration papers, land applications, petitions, birth records, and trade licenses. All included pre-printed titles, blank spaces for names, dates, signatures, and seal areas. No longer did one have to write from scratch, just fill in the blanks. This convenience marked the birth of mass administration. In Venice, a merchant seeking to open a textile workshop could retrieve a template from the Guild Council, fill in the details, sign it, and pay a small fee. If approved, a printed business license, Licentia Mercatoris, was issued on the spot, with just the name and date added, then sealed. An official document could now be processed within a single morning, something unimaginable a century earlier. In England, under Elizabeth I, the Office of the Rolls was reorganised to store all royal edicts, treaties, and court documents. Records were copied by hand, sealed with lead, and kept in rolled parchment scrolls. Diplomatic correspondence, in particular, was categorised by security level. Some letters were open and public, others sealed and sent directly to ambassadors. Administration had entered the age of secrecy. Documents were no longer solely public. They now contained strategic information, negotiations, intelligence, secret pacts. To protect such data, encryption began to appear. Code words, transpositions, or private symbols. Not just to hide, but to control who knew and who didn't. Anywhere in 16th century Europe, Florence, Istanbul, Krakow, or Antwerp, on a damp morning, one might see a familiar figure, a secretary seated at a wooden desk, beside a cabinet of folders, quill in hand, bent over a paper with a printed frame. Everything was silent. But beneath that pen stroke was an entire kingdom, running on ink, seals, and repetition. Administration had moved beyond churches and cathedrals. It had entered every shop, every market square, every courthouse. And more importantly, it had moved beyond individual hands to become a system. When printed materials became more regularly produced, when administrative forms grew familiar, and when correspondence crossed mountains and borders, the ruling dynasties of Europe came to a profound realization. Writing was no longer enough. They needed to preserve. Previously, each document was a lone entity, written, signed, sealed, and sent. But now it became a unit in a management chain, a piece in the machinery of the national data system. By the 17th century, states began to establish dedicated repositories, central archives, Archivum Regni, Archivio di Stato, Archives Nationales, differing in name by realm, yet united in purpose, to preserve the memory of the state. In France, the Archives du Royaume was established in Paris by the late 16th century. Inside were tens of thousands of royal edicts, land deeds, trade licenses, tax records, and petitions from every province. These documents were carefully categorised by date, region, and function. Birth registers, death records, property files, court records. Each document was assigned a unique number, handwritten on the margin or cover, and listed in thick, detailed indexes. Meanwhile, in Austria, the Hofkammerarchiv, Imperial Ministry of Finance Archive, grew into a powerful institution. Officials there not only stored documents, but also compiled statistics, made comparisons, and submitted financial reports to the court, all based on years of archived paperwork. It was no longer memory that served power, but paper. From this need for preservation arose the central registration offices. First came birth registers, Liber Natalium, or Registre de Naissance. No longer written solely in parish books, births, along with names, dates, and parents, were entered into standardised civic registries, with copies sent to provincial and central authorities. Next followed marriage records, death records, conscription lists, and residence logs. Every individual, whether a peasant in the countryside or a civil servant in the city, began to accumulate an administrative trace, a file that grew thicker with time. In Germany, the Standesamt civil registry office system began forming in the mid-17th century, where every major life event, birth, marriage, divorce, death, relocation, was officially recorded. Each document bore a local seal, the signature of the registrar, and was filled out using pre-printed forms, no longer copied by hand, just filled in. From here emerged a new concept: bureaucratic identity. One's social or legal standing no longer depended on reputation or lineage, but on having the correct documentation. Without papers, one could not marry, inherit, travel, study, or trade. Paperwork was no longer an accessory, it became the spine of legal personhood. And as empires expanded beyond Europe, to the Americas, Africa, and Asia, colonial administrations carried with them a massive machine of paperwork. The Spanish, in Mexico, established the Archivo General de Dios. India's preserving every document related to colonial rule: maps, population lists, mining records, priest licenses, inventories of colonial estates. In India, the British set up administrative offices in Madras, Calcutta, and Bombay, each with their own archives, containing full copies of every decree from London. Administrative paperwork no longer stopped at national borders. It now crossed oceans and became a tool of global governance. A local villager in the Philippines, a Dutch merchant in Indonesia, a French engineer in Algeria, All were bound by lines written in a distant capital, thousands of kilometres away. The domination of paperwork led states to distrust anything that wasn't recorded. A person without a birth certificate? Did they truly exist? A land without a deed? Who owned it? And if it couldn't be written down, could it be governed at all? Thus was born a new administrative philosophy. If you're not recorded, you don't exist. From that idea came inventions that may seem mundane today, but were revolutionary acts of governance. The first identity cards, household registration books, official land cadastries, passports, residence permits, military service books, all emerge from a single bureaucratic need. The state must know who you are, where you are, and what you do, and it must be written, printed, and preserved. And as these documents came to rest in silent storage rooms, where clerks moved among tall shelves, wearing gloves to handle fragile paper, the history of society no longer passed through oral stories, but through handwritten data streams. The king might die, the palace might crumble, the language might change. But if the paper remained, the power remained. As the morning bells rang across the grey stone rooftops of European cities, as postage stamps began to appear on the edges of letters, and as land maps were redrawn with uniform inked lines, something quietly began to shift in how humanity organised itself. Paperwork, once a means of memory, once legal proof, was now acquiring a new purpose: to measure. This was the moment when governments realised that to govern effectively, to tax accurately, and to conscript on time, it wasn't enough to know individual names. They had to know how many. Thus began the dawn of proto-statistics, not with computers or Excel sheets, but with pre-printed forms, handwritten in ink, submitted to every level of authority. In Sweden, in 1749, the first nationwide census was conducted, a revolutionary initiative for its time. Each parish was sent a form with columns to fill, total number of men and women, number of children, the elderly, deaths in the past year, and, if available, the cause of death. The form came with an ID number, instructions for completion, and a demand for absolute accuracy. The results were compiled by hand in Stockholm, taking months, but it marked the beginning of societal governance through numbers. At the same time in Prussia, the central government issued a standardised property reporting form for the entire kingdom. Every landowner had to fill in their number of hectares, ploughs, labourers, average grain yield, and estimated market price. This data wasn't only used for taxation, it was copied, analysed and sent to the king as an administrative wealth map. From these forms, the language of administration began to change. Gone were the flowery declarations of "we hereby grant" or "by royal command." Instead, there were fields, rows, columns, codes and check marks. Administrative writing became a tool of abstraction, reducing human lives into manageable data points. From this point on, every individual, whether street sweeper or merchant, was increasingly defined by a string of identifying documents. A personal file could now contain dozens of official papers: birth certificate, proof of residence, vaccination record tax, receipt, military exemption, marriage certificate, occupation license, and more. Each had its own form, its own coding, its own receiving office, and its own archival system. To manage this growing information, states began to standardise administration. In France, by the late 18th century, just before the Revolution, the Conseil du Roi reorganised the national paperwork system. Every province from Lille to Marseille had to use the same national forms. Standardised birth ledgers, standardised death registration, standardised property declarations. For the first time, the country had a unified administrative language, on paper. In England, the General Register Office was founded to regulate births and deaths across the entire kingdom. All birth certificates had to follow strict formatting: names of parents, occupations, place of birth, dates written in Latin script. Any document deviating from the standard would be invalid. From this rigid formatting came new professional roles: form examiner, form master, record keeper, responsible for cataloguing by reference number, and even form designer. These seemingly mundane jobs became the foundation of modern legal and sociological systems. Thanks to forms, governments began to see their nations on paper, not just on maps. No longer vast territories, but numbers. Number of people, number of illnesses, number of households, schools, lawsuits and crimes. No more fireside stories. Now there were thousands of handwritten numbers, compiled into policy. And so, administrative paperwork evolved from maintaining order to defining reality. If your name didn't appear in the form, you didn't exist in the system. If your illness wasn't matched to a valid code, it wasn't counted. If your job didn't align with the official occupational list, you weren't licensed. The world was slowly, very slowly, shifting from observing reality to constructing reality through documents. And all of it began with a spreadsheet, a pre-printed sheet, a blank space waiting for a name, a carbon copy sent to the archive, an index ledger in the corner of a storage room, labelled Year 1763. Amid a Europe entering the scientific and Enlightenment revolutions, with great discoveries and political upheaval, administration remained steady, like a heartbeat, quiet, unhurried, but absolutely essential. Chapter 7. The 19th Century. A new sound emerged in the administrative offices of the 19th century. Not the soft scratching of quills on parchment, nor the pressing of wax seals, but the rhythmic clacking of the typewriter. With each keystroke, a character appeared, uniform, aligned, free of smudges. And with that, a new era began. Administration was no longer handwritten, but mechanised. The 19th century, alongside the Industrial Revolution, marked the shaping of the modern state. No longer just feudal courts or the overlapping powers of monarchs and clergy. It was now a structured government, complete with a budget, a bureaucracy, and a growing responsibility to an exploding population, expanding cities, and an increasingly globalised world. To govern a nation of millions, the state could no longer rely solely on local officials or noble councils. It needed something else, a professional administrative apparatus. And to operate that machine, it needed one simple but irreplaceable tool: paperwork. Administrative paperwork became denser, more detailed, and more commonplace. Paperwork was no longer the domain of nobles, priests, or merchants. Now everyone needed documents. In England, the Civil Registration Act of 1837 was passed. Every citizen, from birth, was required to have a birth certificate, recorded by the General Register Office. Deaths, marriages, name changes, all had to be registered. No exceptions, no document, no rights. In France, after the Revolution of 1789, the État civil, civil registry, was removed from the Church's control and placed fully under state jurisdiction. Every city, town and village had an office to record births, deaths, marriages and divorces. Pre-printed forms were sent from Paris to the provinces. Local officials were not allowed to alter the formatting or wording to ensure national uniformity. A French citizen born in Lyon, married in Marseille, and deceased in Bordeaux, all their life events could be traced via numbered registry books, thanks to a consistent, continuous, and increasingly precise administrative system. At the same time in Germany, Otto von Bismarck, architect of the unified German Empire, understood that to build a strong nation, one needed not only steel and an army, but also an administrative system capable of counting every citizen, tracking every household, and collecting every tax on time. He restructured the bureaucracy into hierarchical levels, from Gemeinde, municipality, to Kreisdistrikt, Regierungsbezirk, regional level, and up to the central government. Each level had its own record office, standardised forms, indexing systems, document codes, and separate archives. Administrative documents were no longer standalone pages. They were part of a system, numbered, coded, with revision history, original and duplicate copies, and ready for retrieval at any moment. This marked the birth of the administrative file. An individual could now have academic records, military files, tax records, residency files, judicial files, all with reference numbers, archival dates, storage locations and update statuses. For the first time, administrative officials became a recognised profession. In France, Germany, England, Austria, schools were established to train clerks, document specialists and administrators. Students learned to write reports, categorise files, preserve documents, operate typewriters, handle forms and organise archives by catalogue codes. Even the content of documents began to follow strict templates. An official notice had to include a header, a summary, a legal basis, an implementation clause, and a closing statement. Phrases like pursuant to, based on, hereby enacted, and annexed hereto began to appear repeatedly in millions of documents each year. In the United States, after the Civil War, the expanding federal government faced a new urgency, standardizing documents across states. Federal letters, tax reports, customs logs, budget forms, and naturalization certificates were all pre-printed in Washington, D.C., then distributed nationwide by rail. In 1870, the US Government Printing Office was established. It was tasked with printing all official documents, federal laws, tax forms, budget reports, congressional records. Everything was catalogued, numbered, and publicly archived. For the first time, a modern democratic administration had a pre-printed national filing system. Documents also began to generate data. From paperwork, governments calculated birth rates, illiteracy rates, immigration rates, epidemic mortality rates, unemployment figures, land ownership stats, court cases. And from these numbers, for the first time in history, policies were crafted not by instinct but by data. By the end of the 19th century, in most industrialised countries, you could not function without paperwork. No birth certificate, no school, no residency permit, no legal housing, no draft record, no exemption from military service, no tax documents, no property ownership, no marriage certificate, no legal family. And if you lost your documents, you lost your legal identity. For the first time in human history, administrative identity was as important as, or even more than, social identity. Who you were wasn't just what you said, it was what your paperwork said about you. As the 19th century moved into its latter half, the pace of history quickened, but administration continued, steadily. Each sheet of paper, each seal, each duplicate copy was still written, printed, and archived, like the steady heartbeat hidden within the chest of the state. And to keep that heart beating reliably, a growing need became clear. Archiving. If the 18th century was the era of forms and personal management, then the 19th century was the age of the modern archive. No longer just a matter of keeping documents. Now it was about systematic storage, with indexes, with categorization, with dedicated physical spaces where every file was stored by year, by region, by document type, and sometimes even by paper colour. In France, in 1794, amid the Revolution, the Archives Nationales was formally established to store all documents related to the state. By the 19th century, it had become a vital part of government operations. Documents from the feudal period, the Revolution, the Napoleonic era, all were sorted, categorised and coded. To find a single document, one had to follow handwritten indexes, locate the correct shelf, open a leather pouch, pull out the original, and compare it with its copy, all done in an almost sacred silence. In Germany, Landesarchive, state archives, were developed across regions. Each state stored its documents, but followed common standards: year of filing, document type, issuing department, and authorising official. Archivists began to be seen as the guardians of national memory. At the same time, a series of new tools appeared. Iron filing cabinets with sliding drawers and combination locks, card catalogues, recording document codes, creation dates and storage locations, embossing machines for coding file covers, and most notably the Remington typewriter, which allowed documents to be created faster, more uniformly, and more legibly than ever before. A clerk could produce 20 administrative entries in a single morning, something that would have taken days to handwrite. Administration thus became regular and industrialised. Every letter, every line, every margin left no room for improvisation. And then war came. The Franco-Prussian War, 1870, followed by colonial conflicts, and eventually the footsteps leading toward World War I, deeply altered the way administration functioned. In war, paperwork was no longer just information, it was survival. A soldier without documents, no weapon issued. A prisoner without ID, no exchange possible. A city without administrative maps, no way to organise defence. At this point, detailed administrative maps, population registers, military reserve lists, travel permits, ration coupons, evacuation orders became life-critical documents. In Britain, the War Office reorganised its soldier record system. Each serviceman had a complete file, including medical certificates, training records, assignment orders, and performance reports. These files followed each soldier throughout their career until discharge or death. In the colonies, administration was replicated. In India, the British established government record offices in every province. In Indochina, the French used French language forms for household registration, land records, and occupational licenses. In Algeria, Tunisia, and Congo, administration went hand in hand with education, taxation, and population control, all carried out with forms, logbooks, and stamps. The global spread of administration created a new demand: the mass training of clerical staff. In France, schools like the École Nationale des Chartes trained professional archivists. In Germany, Beamtenausbildung, civil service training, prepared officials. In the UK and USA, universities began offering courses in record management, public administration, and document organisation techniques. By the end of the 19th century, a quiet transformation had taken hold. Every office had filing cabinets. Every clerk typed on a machine. Every document had a code. Every person had a file in storage. And for the first time, paperwork was not just something the state used for itself. It became a channel of interaction between government and citizen. You submitted a form, you received a response. You had documentation, you received entitlements. You had no papers, you did not exist. Amid the sweeping changes of the world, amid the rising speed of industrialisation, among steam trains and chimneys, administration remained steady. Each copy, each typed line, each stamped seal, slow but certain, laid the hidden foundation beneath every city, every person, every modern relationship. In the dim yellow light of late-day municipal offices, amid the soft rustling of parchment and the gentle clink of iron drawers sliding open and shut, a new kind of person was taking shape. Not a peasant, not a noble, not a cleric, but rather the administrative citizen. A person no longer defined by birthplace, lineage or faith, but by their government file. From birth, schooling, work, marriage, migration to death, every individual left behind a long trail of paperwork. And that paper trail wasn't just something that followed them. It was them. You could not marry without a birth certificate. You could not own land without a deed. You could not be buried without a death notice. You could not litigate without authorization papers, verification forms, or documentary evidence. At this point, administration was no longer merely a tool of the state. It had become a parallel layer of reality, in which only what was written, stamped and archived could exist legally. In industrialized cities like Berlin, Manchester, Paris, Vienna, the booming population brought a surge in documentation. Each city had become a vast paperwork machine, building permits, labour registrations, residency declarations, business licenses, rental agreements, welfare applications, medical clearances, zoning maps. Documents were no longer the exception. They were the condition of existence. In France, an Italian immigrant working in a Lyon textile mill would have to provide identification papers from Italy, proof of residency in France, a certificate of employment, and, if marrying, a legally recognised marriage certificate valid in both countries. If any of these were missing, the person could face expulsion, lose the right to reside, or be denied labour insurance. From this need arose a critically important document type, the certified copy. Where once only the original held absolute authority, the growing circulation of documents made it impossible for offices to send out originals. So they copied them, by hand or by duplicating machines, and affixed stamps reading copia conforme, certified copy, or copie certifiée conforme à l'original, a certification seal, an authorised signature, the date and place of authentication. All these combined to give the copy legal standing. Gradually, society learned to trust what wasn't original, if it was accompanied by the proper process. That's when the profession of the notary emerged. A notary was someone who certified the authenticity of copies, contracts, and wills, and the presence of signing parties. Their role wasn't to judge, but to guarantee that what was written was real. In Germany, the notar became a legal office defined by law. In France, the notaire became the keeper of wills, property contracts, and transfer deeds. In England, the public notary had the power to authenticate documents for use in court. From notarization, from copies, from valid paperwork, society began to shift. Legal, written. No longer a matter of oaths or spoken witness. Law had become a paper-based order. Documents now didn't just record reality, they defined reality. A child listed on a birth certificate legally exists. A home backed by a contract is protected by law. A notarized agreement can be enforced in court. A will written in proper form, with witnesses and certification, can divide an estate. Administration, through documentation, had created a new order of the world, and that order came not from emotion or morality, but from the correct format of a document. The proper seal of an agency, dates without discrepancy, valid signatures, and the ability to retrieve it from archives. Amid a world changing at breakneck speed, telegraphs, railroads, factories, schools, administrative paperwork kept its own rhythm, steady, meticulous, unhurried, but enduring like bedrock. It produced no heroes, no victory songs, no glory or grief. But it was there, in drawers, in iron cabinets, in archive rooms tinged with the smell of dry ink, like the memory of the entire system. By the end of the 19th century, administration was no longer a part of the state. It was the mode in which the state functioned, and paperwork, fragile, flammable, easy to stain, had become the strongest foundation of modern power. Chapter 8. The Modern Era. The 20th century began with the soot of industry, the whistle of trains, and the hurried footsteps of expanding cities. But amid all that speed, administration continued. Slowly. Paperwork was still printed, filled out, signed, and filed. And if you were to open a filing cabinet anywhere in the world in 1910, from Berlin to Buenos Aires, from Tokyo to Cairo, you'd find thousands of sheets of paper with ruled lines, date columns, checkboxes, and sometimes the lingering scent of freshly printed ink in the air. As the world entered World War I and later World War II, administrative paperwork only grew. Even amid fire and smoke, no war could be organised without documentation. No refugee could receive aid without identification papers. No soldier could be named without payroll sheets, personnel lists, and movement orders. Administration, once quiet, had become the invisible backbone of war machines. At the same time, nations entered the era of mass management. Administrative systems no longer served hundreds of thousands. Now they had to handle tens of millions. In the United States, the federal government introduced the Social Security number for every citizen. One unique number that followed a person across all records: birth certificates, tax forms, driver's licenses, medical files, job applications. A single number, summarizing an entire administrative life. In the Soviet Union, population records were kept with near total precision. Each citizen had a domovoi kniga, a household registration book, recording residence, occupation, work unit, and history of relocation. Neighbourhood committees kept local copies. The police held duplicates. The central government held the master files. All of it on paper, handwritten, signed, and stamped. And for a long time, paper still beat the machine. Computers were just lab experiments. Paper could be touched, photocopied, brought to court, checked on demand. It wasn't until the 1970s and 1980s that administration truly shifted. Not with a revolution, but with a microchip. Around the world, paper notebooks were replaced with computers. Tax systems were digitized. Populations were managed through databases. Documents were typed with software, not typewriters. Forms weren't pre-printed. They were generated by programs and printed as needed. An invisible administrative world began to take shape. No more thick folders, no more overflowing drawers. Now, green screens, blinking cursors, and endless lines of coded human data. From the 1990s onward, governments around the world launched national databases. Each citizen had a digital ID. Records were linked from birth to death. Licenses, degrees, taxes, insurance, criminal background, all part of a centralized system. But strangely, paper never disappeared. People still print household registration records, still need graduation certificates, still request certified hard copies, still print documents, sign them by hand, then scan them back in, because humans, even in the digital world, still trust paper, a silent, ritualistic trust. When you hold a certified copy in your hand, you're not just seeing the content, you're seeing recognition, you're feeling order. You know someone, somewhere, has officially acknowledged your existence, in writing. Modern administration is no longer about writing. It is about system design. We speak of e-government. We speak of AI and population management. We speak of digital contracts, digital signatures, blockchain documentation. And yet, in the record rooms of parliaments, schools, hospitals and courts, paper archives remain. Silent filing cabinets lined up in perfect rows. Copies printed on yellowing paper, folded in half. Documents with faded blue ink, their round stamps blurred with time. And so when we look back across this entire journey, from Sumerian clay tablets to 21st century laser printers, we don't see a revolution. We see continuity. Administrative paperwork is not an event. It is a foundational heartbeat, never stopping. Not glamorous, not emotional, not remembered. But it is the very thing that remembers everything. Who you are, what you've done, where you are, may not matter unless it is written down, on a form, in a file, numbered, archived, and then silence. In the darkness of a modern archive, paper still sleeps, waiting for someone to need a fragment of memory written long ago. This is where the story ends. Thank you for listening to this long, quiet journey of something that may seem dull, but is in truth the silent soul of civilization, administrative paperwork. When the war ended, the nations devastated by bombs and fire did not rebuild with cannons or armies. They rebuilt with paperwork. No citizen could live without documents. No rights could be granted without forms. No future could be secured without records. Amid the rubble, the first offices to be reconstructed were administrative offices. They didn't just distribute food, they issued certificates of distribution. They didn't just offer medical aid, they registered you on eligibility lists. They didn't just allow resettlement, they required a relocation application, an identity document, and a declaration of assets. The post-war 20th century was the age of the modern welfare state. In this world, the right to education, healthcare, housing, unemployment benefits, maternity leave, and pensions all had to be certified through administrative documents. In the United Kingdom after 1945, the National Insurance Act mandated that each citizen receive an insurance card, which recorded their work history, contribution levels, unemployment periods, and benefits for retirement or job loss. At the same time, the National Health Record System was born. Every patient was assigned a unique patient ID, along with a vaccination log, medical files, and duplicate records stored at higher-level hospitals. If the patient was transferred, the records followed. This was a turning point, from merely managing citizens to caring for them, from control-based administration to service-based administration. But in order to serve a society of millions, the state had to do one thing first: standardise every form, from school registration, vaccination slips, housing applications, to income tax declarations. Everything needed to be consistent in paper size, order of information, layout and formatting, coded symbols, storage and backup methods. In France, under the de Gaulle government, a system of formulaires nationaux, national forms, was introduced. These forms were printed centrally and sent to each local office. Every form had a printed code in the corner, like Indeg Serifa 1408, and was distributed according to government branch. All agencies were required to use the correct version. Citizens were required to fill out the correct boxes. In Germany, the Sozialversicherungsnummer, social insurance number, was applied nationwide. Every individual, from factory workers to teachers, newborns to retirees, had a unique number linked to all social benefits and obligations. From this number, the government could trace where the person had worked, how long they had been unemployed, what illnesses they had, how much tax they paid, what benefits they received. Administration was no longer about managing people. It was about defining people through data. Each person became a medical file, a tax account, a pension record, an ID number, an education history, a family declaration. All of it printed, stamped, filed, copied and circulated. On paper. Paper became a citizen's second body, a parallel version of their life, existing only in the state's filing cabinets. If you lost this version, you could lose your rights, or even your legal identity. In Italy, after 1950, every city had an officio anagrafe, a civil registry office. There, each person had a resident file, including birth certificate, address, marital status, occupation, and changes in family. The files were handwritten, copied into large leather-bound ledgers, stored in local archives, and submitted to provincial offices every 6 months. In the United States, following the New Deal era, administrative bodies expanded to meet the demand for welfare programs. Every citizen received a social security card with a permanent lifelong number. If the card was lost, the person had to undergo a procedure involving a certified copy of their birth certificate, identity papers, and a residency verification letter. Administrative departments also became increasingly specialised. Form intake, office validity check, department central records, archive, data reconciliation unit, certified copy, issuing office. In Canada, each administrative document was catalogued under the records classification system. For instance, a personal health record was coded as HCP 312. With this code, a clerk could locate the archive location, number of remaining copies, storage and expiration dates, and the time of scheduled disposal. The world of administration was no longer a world for readers and writers. It became an underground network connecting society through paper, A school transfer request might take 3 days to move from the old school to the new, via the district office, the city's Department of Education, and back, complete with an official seal. All this just to confirm that a student had officially existed within the system. Among steel drawers, towering piles of files, and typewriters ticking like clocks, human society entered a new condition. Every right had an associated form. Every social existence required confirmation by document. Every interaction with the state demanded a file number. The world became easier to control, but also easier to lose track of. A missing certified copy, you lose access to healthcare. A typo in your ID number, you don't receive your pension. A lost document, you might vanish from the system for weeks or even years. The 20th century witnessed an unprecedented expansion of administrative paperwork, not just in quantity, but in its central role in personal life. No papers, no person. No copy, no rights, no number, no administrative existence. Like a classic machine driven by brass gears, the administrative system of the 20th century initially ran smoothly, powerful, precise, and covering every corner of society. But then one day the sound of paper became too slow. Each copy took days to print, sign, and stamp. Each file took hours to search, by hand, by eye. Each typing error, a wrong number, a misspelled name, led to payment delays, denied permits, or service refusals. The massive administrative machine, powered by billions of sheets of paper, began to show its limits. People stood in line for hours at public offices. Files went missing between ministries. Data was duplicated, incorrect, outdated. And worse, the system began to contradict itself. Someone changed their address, but no one updated their tax record. A business registered with the wrong name, so it couldn't sign government contracts. A citizen paid their insurance, but the system couldn't find their account number. In France, between 1965 and 1975, central administrative agencies received over 12 million complaints per year, most related to errors in paperwork, lost files, and processing delays. The system had reached the operating limits of paper. Meanwhile, the world outside was accelerating. Subways were already automated, television broadcast via satellite. Banks began storing data on magnetic tapes. And people started asking, why is administration still using typewriters? In the United States, some government agencies were the first to adopt mainframe computers to store simple administrative data. In large cold rooms, IBM machines held millions of data points on punch cards or magnetic tapes, not as documents, but as coded information. Instead of storing a birth certificate on paper, people began saving ID numbers, names, birth dates, birthplaces, hospital codes, original document references, all entered into one of the first database systems. In the UK in 1969, the government began testing the National Health Computer System, storing patient records not in folders, but as medical codes and electronic data. Computers didn't yet replace paper, but they became the invisible backstage of administration. This was the era of data duplication. Every paper file had a primitive digital copy. Every handwritten form was re-entered into a machine. Every permit had a parallel numeric code. Still, the transition from paper to data wasn't easy. Many civil servants were unfamiliar with computers. Many offices lacked stable electricity or the right machines. Many citizens, especially the elderly, didn't trust anything without paper or stamps. In fact, for many years, people printed digital archives just to stamp them and store them as physical records. In Canada, social welfare offices used daisy wheel printers to print applications entered by computer, then mailed them for citizens to sign by hand, scan them back in, and file them, creating a cycle between paper and digital. It was amid this overlap that a slow transformation began. Society began to get used to data, and governments began to realise the future of administration no longer lay in paper. Early software companies were invited to design systems for storing citizen records. Notary offices began digitizing their ledgers onto floppy disks. Tax agencies allowed electronic form entry. Printouts were brought to the office for signature. In Germany, archival institutions began converting files from leather-bound ledgers to microfilm, and later scanned databases, with the goal, by the year 2000, all civil registry files should be retrievable in under 30 seconds. It was a bold dream, but it began with something small, creating a digital version of every administrative paper, not to completely replace paper, but to help people find the paper faster. Administration entered a strange in-between era. Everything was still written on paper, but everything also had to be encoded digitally, and both existed, silently, in parallel, like two layers of the same society. Now citizens not only had to keep their original documents, but also remember their file numbers. Not just sign with a pen, but sometimes also provide access codes to their digital files. In administrative offices, steel filing cabinets still stood, but beside them were black screen computers, green text blinking, where data was slowly replacing every sheet of paper. This was the final threshold of an era, when paper began to lose its central role, to make room for data, but it hadn't vanished. It merely stepped back, like a background wall, waiting to be fully digitized. Chapter 9. When data becomes the state. No more typewriter clatter, no more steel filing cabinets, no more red pencil corrections on A4 forms. Administration in the 21st century doesn't begin with a printed document, but with an interface. No more filling out paper forms by hand. Citizens open a web page. No more waiting for an officer to check. They click submit. No more standing in line for confirmation. They receive an email. Your request has been received. And with that moment, administration leaves paper behind completely. It is no longer just an administrative system. It becomes a network of behavioural data. In Estonia, by 2001, the government launched X-Road, a digital infrastructure that allows all state agencies to connect, share, and synchronise data in real time. Estonian citizens can file taxes in 3 minutes, register a marriage online, receive prescriptions through the e-health system, and track every access to their personal file, from doctors to social workers. Each citizen is assigned a unique digital ID linked to all administrative activity, not on paper, but in data space. In Singapore, the smart nation model emerged, integrating administrative data, traffic signals, health cards, household registries, and academic records. The system doesn't just know who you are, it anticipates what you need. You move to a new address. The system automatically sends a residency update link. Your child reaches school age. It recommends the nearest school based on housing data, income, and family educational history. Administrative data is no longer passive. It is proactive. It doesn't wait for you to submit documents. It finds you first. It doesn't confirm after the fact. It determines instantly. This marks a turning point in the very concept. Administrative records are no longer a stack of documents. They are a continuous stream of data, constantly updated. When you're admitted to a hospital, your insurance data is checked instantly. When you sign a rental agreement, land, tax, and residency systems activate simultaneously. When you commit a traffic violation, your fine, credit score, and vehicle record all update automatically. No paper, no handwritten signature, no printed copies. Everything happens in an invisible layer, but one that's very real. In the UK, since 2010, the gov.uk Verify system has allowed citizens to access and authenticate all administrative services, from passport applications to driver's licence renewals to unemployment benefits, all through a single digital identity account. And so, the state is no longer a place. no longer a building, a file room, or a row of service counters. The state is now digital infrastructure, always open, always connected, always watching. This creates a paradox. You interact with the state more than ever before, yet you no longer see it. It doesn't appear on paper. It has no voice. It has no face. It's the email from a no-reply address, the alert from the tax system, a status update on your account. Processed. And in that grey zone, a new form of administration is born, with no documents, no physical files, only streams of data shaping reality. Who you are is defined by databases. What rights you have is calculated by administrative algorithms. Where you've gone wrong is flagged by automated analysis. Paper hasn't vanished, but it has been reborn as data. When the clock struck the year 2000, many feared that computers would fail due to the Y2K bug, a 2-digit year format error that left machines unable to distinguish between 1900 and 2000. But instead of collapsing, the global administrative system began to accelerate. The failure never came, but it revealed a startling truth. Modern society runs entirely on data, and if that data is inaccurate, the entire administrative structure can collapse. Governments around the world began to ask themselves, if every citizen owns a computer, if the internet becomes commonplace, why should anyone have to go to an office just to file for maternity leave? Why should someone wait 2 hours to reissue a lost insurance card when the data already exists in the system? And so, the concept of e-government officially entered the global agenda. In Estonia, by 2001, the small Baltic country had already issued digital ID cards to every citizen, equipped with authentication, digital signature, and access to personal records. Each Estonian citizen could file taxes, register a marriage, start a business, apply for child benefits, all within minutes at a computer screen. No need to print, no need for handwritten signatures. All operations were confirmed via digital signatures and OT codes. Estonia became the model for a paperless society. Meanwhile, in larger countries like Germany, France, Canada, South Korea, and Japan, digital administration began to evolve in 3 main directions. 1. Unified digital portals. Each citizen has a personal account. All administrative services accessed via a single interface. Forms are completed and submitted online. Responses sent via email or SMS. 2. Unique identification numbers, UID. A single number accesses all personal data linked to healthcare, taxation, insurance, civil status, and residence. 3. Digital signatures and electronic authentication, fully replacing handwritten signatures, legally equivalent to ink signatures, encrypted and securely stored according to international standards. In South Korea, since 2007, all citizens could file personal income tax via the home tax portal, pay insurance premiums through the social insurance platform, download birth certificates, report cards and transcripts from the citizen portal. With just a few clicks, this transformation didn't just save time, it redefined the entire philosophy of paperwork. Documents no longer had to be printed to be considered valid. Red seals were no longer essential for authentication, and not visiting a government office no longer meant being unofficial. Instead, legal recognition became a matter of a valid confirmation code, a verified timestamp, traceable data logs, and the ability to be independently verified by the system. Many nations passed electronic records legislation, allowing government agencies to digitize entire archives of paper documents, declare digital copies legally equivalent to originals, destroy millions of paper records to save space and resources. In France, a 2000 law validated electronic signatures, granting full legal force to any contract, form or document signed using certified software. In Japan, the J-list system connected local governments nationwide, allowing citizens to transfer residency, register marriages, and apply for ID cards across prefectures without appearing in person. In India, starting in 2009, the Aadhaar program was launched, assigning each citizen a 12-digit UID linked to biometric data, photo, fingerprints, iris scan. This became the largest digital administrative system in the world, with over 1 billion users by 2016. All of this pointed to one conclusion. Administration is no longer a building, it's an interface. No need to step into a government office. No need to meet a civil servant. No need for printed forms or inked seals. You can exist, change, and be verified entirely within the system. This is dematerialized administration, where data replaces documents, protocols replace rituals, and identity becomes an encrypted bundle of information, automatically validated. However, this transformation was not uniform. Many countries still struggled with infrastructure gaps, cybersecurity concerns, lack of digital literacy, resistance over privacy, fears. Others faced massive hurdles in digitizing old archives, yellowed papers, faded handwriting, smudged ink seals, misfiled or disorganized records. Thus, for a long time, e-government coexisted with a parallel paper system. You could apply for a permit online, but still had to print and submit it by hand. You could complete a form digitally, but still be required to sign and mail it. The world was changing, but paper was not ready to step aside. One quiet morning, you sit in front of your computer, open a browser, enter your personal identification number, confirm your phone number, and then your entire administrative life appears before you. No rustling paper, no red ink stamps, no queues, no need to see anyone. Just lines of data, summoned as if from some invisible place, at once concrete and intangible. Paper, once the material embodiment of administrative power, has quietly disappeared. You still have a birth certificate, but it's now a PDF file with a QR code. You still have an insurance record, but it's just a string of numbers stored on a national server. You still have a household registry, but no one ever sees it anymore. It has dissolved into the central database. And somewhere, in old archives lie dusty filing cabinets, leather-bound registers, Roneo copies, faded official seals, once the heartbeat of 20th century administration, now only material memories. The 21st century did not abolish paperwork. It redefined the very concept of it. Instead of carrying it in your hands, you carry it in your digital wallet. Instead of submitting it in person, you upload it to an online portal. Instead of verification by stamped ink, you have digital signatures, electronic authentication, and triple-layer encryption. In Estonia, the world's leader in digital governance, 99% of public services are digitized. Citizens only need to visit government offices for 3 things: marriage, divorce, disputed real estate transactions. Everything else, from business registration and tax filing to residency renewals and scholarship applications, is processed through X-Road, a system where agencies share data in real time. No duplication, no copying, no physical documents. In France, the France Connect portal allows citizens to use a single account to access over 900 public services, from taxes, pensions, and social insurance to schools, housing, and healthcare. In Singapore, SingPass performs a similar role, with biometric authentication and a complete access log for every piece of personal data. Administrative data no longer sits on desks. It lives in data centers, protected by firewalls, encryption, and multi-layered authentication. Administration is no longer a physical process. It is the continuous flow of verified information. Yet, with every step forward in technology, something is also quietly lost. Lost is the stillness of flipping through old paper files. Lost are the smudged ink marks on handwritten requests. Lost is the moment of nervous anticipation outside a notary's door, waiting for the words "verified." Lost is the feeling of holding a physical object that represented your rights and your legal presence in the world. Now you submit a request without knowing who receives it. You receive approval without knowing who signed it. You are processed without ever facing another human. Administration is faster, but it is also quieter, like an orchestra with no real instruments, playing only digital signals, flawless in tempo but lacking a certain humanity. In many national archives, old records are being digitised, scanned with high-resolution machines, saved as TIFF files, named under international standards, stored on RAID systems to prevent data loss. One day, a handwritten birth record from 1892 will exist only as a 12 MB file on a hard drive. A typed contract from 1944 will survive only as an unchangeable PDF. And the entire history of paper administration will no longer appear in everyday life, but will rest silently on cold servers in the shadows of data centres. And so, after nearly 5,000 years, from Sumerian clay tablets, Egyptian papyrus, Roman scrolls, medieval registries, early modern forms, to modern welfare files, administrative paperwork has quietly stepped back, not because it became obsolete, but because it paved the way for what comes next: administration without paper, yet still requiring what paper once symbolised: order, verification, and lawful existence. Chapter 10. Digital Administration. From Databases to Virtual Existence. There was no specific day when administrative paperwork disappeared. No official announcement declared, "From today, everything has been fully digitised." Things just quietly changed. One day you no longer held your birth certificate in hand. You downloaded a PDF from the public service portal. One day you filed taxes not through the post, but through a web browser. One day you requested a pension confirmation not by filling out a form by hand, but by clicking Submit Request. And from that day forward, you began living in a fully digital, administrative world. Databases are no longer secondary to paper. They have become the sole space where administrative authority resides. No physical backups, no hard copies, no red stamps, no handwritten signatures, only case numbers, two-factor authentication systems, and digital timestamps. In Estonia, one of the pioneers, citizens are issued an electronic ID card, equipped with a chip that encrypts all personal data. From voting, registering residency, paying insurance, signing contracts, to applying for passports, everything is done through a single platform, with each action leaving a digital trace. In Germany, the Elster system allows citizens to file taxes, receive results, and reconcile financial data without leaving their homes. Every person is a login, a security key, and an encrypted access code. Paper is no longer the main medium. It has become merely a printout of data. Even the signature, once a personal, handwritten, inked symbol, has been replaced by a digital signature, an encrypted string tied to a digital certificate, legally valid, yet invisible. In modern administrative offices, there are no printers, no filing cabinets, only servers, fibre optic cables, encryption software, and sometimes they're cloud storage centres thousands of kilometres away. Your records are not at City Hall. They live in national data centres, or within distributed systems, where thousands of digital backups are stored across various drives and locations, ensuring you never lose your paperwork. Yet alongside this convenience is a profound shift in the concept of administrative existence. Previously, you existed administratively through handwritten forms, red stamps, and signatures. Now you exist through digital traces. Every action you take, opening a bank account, booking a medical appointment, registering a business, leaves a log in the system. And from that log, the system recognises that you exist. No log? You have nothing. A coding error? You can't access your records. A security breach? Your administrative account could be locked. A mistyped ID number? You could vanish from the welfare network. And in the digital world, no one can find you by sight. Your records aren't in a drawer. No one can flip through pages and find your name. They reside in algorithmic systems. And if no one has the proper access rights, you're overlooked. This is the new paradox. The more digitized and precise the system becomes, the easier it is to get lost. From a single typo. In modern e-government, no one dies from losing paperwork, but you can die administratively if you mistype an email, forget a password, or lose your personal access code. To address this, the digital state has created a new layer of administration: verification administration, authentication by phone number, authentication by fingerprint or facial recognition, authentication via OTP codes or security apps, cross-verification between databases. Today, the administrative system no longer asks, "Who are you?" It asks, "Can you prove who you are?" to the system. And you, the citizen of the 21st century, exist not through a birth certificate on the wall, but through a screen that says, "Authentication successful." Paper is no longer printed, stamps are no longer applied by hand, signatures are no longer written with pens, and you, the citizen, no longer visit administrative offices. Then one quiet morning, you open your computer, log into a digital government portal, and suddenly your entire administrative life appears. Lines of code, ID numbers, PDF forms, and processing statuses. From birth certificates to tax IDs. From academic degrees to employment contracts. From medical forms to social insurance records. All of it without a single sheet of paper printed. This is the world of digital administration. The 21st century began with a silent but total transformation. Administrative paperwork is no longer paper. It is data, stored on servers, synced across networks, processed by software, and verified through digital signatures. In Estonia, since the early 2000s, every citizen has been issued a national e-identity, a digital identity number granting access to all government services, marriage registration, tax filing, business registration, passport applications, all done online, without a single paper form. In South Korea, the Gov44 system allows citizens to search for, request, modify, and verify over 4,000 types of administrative documents, right from a smartphone. In Denmark, the Netherlands, and Singapore, every interaction with the state, from school applications to construction permits, has a completely paperless version. No copies, no notarization, no need to visit an office. But this is only possible when society has three things in place: a trusted digital identity system, a synchronized national database, and confidence in the legal validity of non-physical data. The digital signature, once a vague concept, is now the standard. When you click sign on a PDF file, the system generates an encrypted code using your private key, validated by the National Certification Authority. That code cannot be forged, and thus a contract becomes legally binding, without a single drop of ink. The digital seal, encrypted and certified, replaces the traditional red stamp. QR codes on driver's licenses and ID cards replace stickers and director signatures. Real-time status tracking replaces phone calls, letters, and waiting at office windows. Paper, as a physical medium, is gone, but the essence of administration remains: verification, approval, documentation, archiving. The only difference, it happens on servers, and instead of filing cabinets, records now live in encrypted data clusters buried beneath government data centres. No more yellowing, tearing, burning, or misfiling. Today's administrative data is automatically backed up, end-to-end encrypted, fragmented and distributed, accessed only through authenticated technical logs. The silence of machines has replaced the sounds of clacking keyboards, opening drawers and stamp punches. But the rhythm remains familiar. Step by step, confirm, log, issue, like the ticking of a clock within a flawless system. Yet digital administration is not just convenient. It fundamentally alters the relationship between citizen and state. When everything is traceable, when every data point has a timestamp, created, edited, accessed, when every action leaves a log, then the state no longer needs to ask. It already knows. And you no longer control all that the state knows about you. This is where digital administration begins to blur the line between governance and surveillance. You've never applied for maternity leave, but the system suggests a form. You didn't report a change of address, but data from utilities, banks, and internet usage reveals it. You haven't updated your tax records, but AI flags inconsistencies in your reported income. The paperless world is fast, precise, and efficient. But it's also a world where documents no longer mark visible boundaries. We now enter the age of digital identity, synchronized administrative records, behavioral data stored as administrative records, and algorithms, not people, making approval decisions.